Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and okay, my story with Clancy is, and I have it here in one of my recordings where I celebrated a birthday, and then during my talk at the beginning of the meeting, I said that it was my first attempt in 1985 to get sober, and it didn't take, of course, because I came back in 94. And I told Clancy I was living in Stockton, and I heard Clancy was going to come to speak, and I thought to myself, I don't need to hear this guy, Clancy. So I did go to the convention or the meeting or wherever it was he was speaking. So Clancy gets up to start talking. He says, Dave, are you still here? I says, yeah, I'm right here. He says, you know, we held that meeting up for 15 minutes waiting for you. So there's my Clancy story. Take care and have a good day if you want to. I know I will.
Our speaker for today is Clancy I from Venice, California.
My name is Clancy Imislund, and I'm an alcoholic. I don't want too much applause. They've used up most of my time with all this sobriety crap. I'm really glad to see such an enthusiastic group. Full of enthusiasm, full of zip, but I want you to know I'll take care of that. I didn't hear the name of the gentleman who got the first birthday, but I want to wish happy birthday to Bruce. And I think that's really, when they sang happy birthday to Bruce, I really kind of got tears in my eyes, because, not because I'm a sentimentalist, but because I'm a musician. It was really bad. Guy back there in the yellow shirt, stand up and take, that was the worst singing I ever heard. Sit down. I like to give credit where credit is due. I want to welcome all the new people. Some people will tell you you're the most important person in the room, but you are not. You are the second most important person in the room. Because if I'm not in the room, it doesn't make any difference who is. To me, and that's the way it should be for everybody. Your sobriety is the most important, right after mine. But if I don't stay sober, it doesn't make any difference who stays sober to me. I want to thank Bernie and Tom, the O'Neill twins, for coming to the airport today and greeting me, whisking me off to Bernie's home. And I was starving. I hadn't had any breakfast. He gave me a dry bagel and some decaf coffee, and stayed on the phone so I couldn't put in an order for more. I better watch my mouth. He's supposed to give me a ride back to the airport, too. Just kidding, Bernie. And I have a special number of you people I've met before when I was at Unity Day and other times. I want to, there are two very distinguished visitors here that you've never heard of and I never heard of, but they're very distinguished. There are two young guys who have just moved here from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And that's where I'm from, is Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And they've heard of me like, maybe like most children hear about the boogeyman. You better watch out, that Clancy will get you, you son of a bitch. Get him. And so they came up to me and, are you him? But I'm very glad to have them here, because one of them is studying to be a Lutheran minister up at Cal, and I think that as I told him, I don't know of anything that will better prepare him to be a Lutheran minister or any kind of a clergyman than being a member of AA. You'll learn more about humanity here than you will ever learn in all the theological schools of the world. You'll have a great leg up on them. There's also a young lady present who came up whose father I sponsor down in Los Angeles. And I only seen her once, and that was after her father had been slipping about 9 years. He finally had a first birthday a couple months ago, and she came down he goes to some 7 o'clock in the morning meeting. Jesus. So I went down there just as a token, but I hated it. But she and I met there, and she's in the program in San Rafael, and she's driven down here, and I trust that you're sufficiently grateful over your father's sobriety to make some slight contribution to my material well-being. I'm sick of thank yous. How about a little something? But this has been I really wasn't terribly looking forward to coming up here. As Tom was saying earlier, I'm kind of a football freak, and I like Sunday afternoon football games and Sunday morning football games, and Sunday should be a day of rest. And I was in San Diego last night, and I had to be at a meeting down there, and I missed the Michigan-Notre Dame game, and it broke my heart. And I got home in time to... Well, it's all right. I consider you people just my purgatory. And we Lutherans don't even believe in purgatory, so you're no use to it. And then I get up to catch a plane this morning and come up here. But I'll tell you, as in most cases of this sort, once I sat down and got going, I just have enjoyed this afternoon very much. I thought Tom just gave an excellent talk this afternoon. I thought he... Don't stop it. This continual applause every time you mention a name or anything. Let me read through the phone book here. Anderson, Carl. Let's hear it for Carl. What is this? Save your applause till the end. And then, but Tom just gave an excellent talk, I thought. I've heard him talk many times. I thought he just gave it, at least to me, maybe it was my fatigue, but it just seemed to be one of his best talks. And I thought the panel on sobriety, usually panels on anything, and this was panel on sponsorship. A panel on anything usually is at best you might approach being a ho-hummer if you get up that high, because they all... And I was pleasantly surprised. I thought this panel was just excellent. I know they were excellent because most of them agreed with the way I secretly think. So I knew they were at the top of their business. But I thought they were excellent. And usually sometimes women on such panels, women AAs, are more concerned how they look as women than they do as AAs, and they have a tendency to mealy mouth. And I thought both of these women just talked as AAs, and they just were excellent. Really? I'm just trying to do a wrap-up here, for Christ's sake. This is not a Horace Height talent contest where I hold my hand over each competitor. I don't know why I talk like that. There's something about San Jose that brings out the terrible part of me. I'm wonderful everywhere else. Hey, perhaps you don't know my role here. I'll tell you. I don't know if you're familiar with carnivals, but in carnivals, they have shows along the midway. And first they put out something kind of flashy, and that draws what is known as the tip or the mooches. And then they use that flash to turn the tip. Turning the tip means selling those mooches tickets to get inside to see a bigger show. And that's what we've had this afternoon. Tom O'Neill he kind of drew the tip. You all stumbled in. Then they had the panel sell you the product. Then at the end of shows at carnivals, you don't know it, there's a thing called the blow-off, where you try to get them mooches out so you can get a new crowd in. I am your blow-off. So anytime you want to get up and just leave, it'll make it easier on all of us. I have to keep talking while there's anybody here. If you're not out of here 5 minutes after the drawing, I'm going to have that man sing Happy Birthday to Bruce again. I don't have anyone here from Los Angeles with me. I noticed I was quite touched when they introduced Tom to speak, and the people from Monterey gave him a rising ovation, just, oh, Tom. All you could hear in my row was, blah, blah, yeah. So I didn't have anyone here to stand for me. So they don't stand for me hardly any place. Before I complete my talk, I want to mention one thing and just work it in here if I can. I used to drink. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, now I'll go back to personalities. John, you tell a bad joke. It's kind of a funny thing. We lose sight of it sometimes. This morning, Tom, we were at Bernie's house. Tom was saying something about he's going to give some terrible talk, and Bernie said, remember, this is a spiritual meeting. It's on Sunday. And usually in a convention, Sundays are the spiritual meeting. Of course, this is not a convention. But it's hard to remember that Sunday morning doesn't make a meeting a spiritual meeting. What makes a spiritual meeting is a collection of 3 or more gathered together to discuss sobriety. That's what makes a spiritual meeting. All meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous are spiritual. Some are not quite as apparently religious as others, but all are spiritual. And we are gathered here this afternoon for a selection of spiritual meetings. And the meeting of Saturday Night Live next Saturday night will be as spiritual as any Sunday morning meeting, and all the meetings that you might go to tonight and next week. And that's a good thing to remember, because this is a spiritual program. And probably the greatest mix-up people like me have when they come around here is confusing spiritual with religious. I think of spiritual, and maybe you do too, and I think of church, and I think of God. And in a sense, that's spiritual. But AA is kind of an odd place. AA deals with spirituality at a level that is not equated with religion at all. You can become religious here, but that is not a part of AA at all. That's a personal choice. Like if you become here and decide to become a car salesman, it doesn't make any difference what you do. The spiritual aspect of this program deals with the spirit of people like you and me. And the alteration of that spirit to do something that is almost impossible to be done. And that is to alter the world around me. It's a strange, strange thing when you stop and think. The purpose of AA, apparently, is not to change me at all. It's to change everybody and everything I see. That's what AA is for. Now, we know that is not actually literally correct. It's something changing in me, but you don't see changes in you. The best way to measure how you're doing is to look around you. If everybody seems to be pretty well okay, you're doing okay. If they all look crappy, you're crappy. No matter how you can prove you're right, in either case. I found that I never heard that concept when I was slipping in and out of AA. I slipped in and out of AA for a great many years, and at first I thought it might be of some help to me. My first meeting, I happened to be in the Eau Claire, Wisconsin County Jail, you little whelps. And I wasn't in there I'm not a big gangster, I was in there for fighting a cop, because at one time in my career, I went through phases of attempting to redress social imbalance and social injustice. And from time to time, I would see the right-wing fascist pig cops making an unjust arrest. And Captain Truth would step in and say, "You can't do this. We've been over there fighting in the Pacific against the Japanese to maintain some degree of freedom in this country, and people like you are not going to disturb it because you have some stinking badge. I'm here to tell you that." You have to have just the right amount of alcohol in you to really get that. to get the correct timbre in your voice. And you want to know something funny? On 2 or 3 occasions, based on my remarks, I got policemen to release the men they were arresting and take me. And I stopped doing that soon after I saw there was a sinister pattern being set up. But I was in the Eau Claire, Wisconsin jail, and I was just there over the weekend. I wasn't going to be there long, and my cellmate happened to be the town drunk. And some A&As came to visit him. And in a small town, you know, everything you ever do gets in the paper. Everything you get in the paper. That's why I live in a big city today. Everything that happens goes in the paper. And this one AA turned to me and he said, we've been reading about you in the paper, son. You want to go to an A&A meeting? I said, sure. Better than sitting here all weekend playing checkers with the jailer's dog. So he took me out of there and he took me across the courthouse square, upstairs of a meat market over on West Grand Avenue, and I went up there and it was just hideous. 20 old, depraved, drawn old pukes from that town, just burned out old fools in their 30s. And it was kind of fun to watch them. It enhanced my basic feeling of superiority. And the same old baloney. Friend, I drank and lost everything. And I came here and put the plug in the jug. And I've just never felt so goddamn wonderful. I don't know if I literally heard it, but that's what I remember. And I was a young guy on my way up. I was making my move. And so this was just a kind of a laugh. And a year later, in a different city, I got into some jams, and people thought I drank too much. And I went to AA again. And the same old fools, different city, same faces. And a year later, I was in a different state, and the heat was on. I went to AA, and I thought maybe it might work if I could find the right people. I don't think so. And just terrible. In that town, they were preaching God to me. You've got to return to God, son. I've always had the feeling that many people in AA are starved for God, and so they must seek Him. You hear people in AA say things like, I've been searching for God for 30 years, and I found Him here. I never searched for God ever. I've known where God was since I was 2 years old. He slowly circles the spire of the Our Savior's Lutheran Church in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And He gives it to sinners, and He gives it to Catholics. And that's okay with me till you get to be one or the other, then you're in trouble. But it's just frightful sometimes when you're sitting in a meeting just trying to get establish some rapport, and some old fool to the, Sonny, we hate to see you fight God. That's all you can do to keep from saying, well, ma'am, you'll never see me fight God again. Boom, right there. Now you can just pick it up on the audio portion of your set for a few days. I was kind of I knew I had some problems, but they were problems not dealing with drinking. I at one time considered the possibility I might be a real alcoholic, but I didn't. It didn't scan, because although I drank like an alcoholic, unlike alcoholics, my basic problems was not drinking. It was sometimes, and I could batch drink as far as anybody, but unlike alcoholics, I seem to have more deep-seated problems or feelings or things that other people didn't have. Over 30 years ago, I went into analysis to try to, a lot of people in AA say you shouldn't go to analysis, you shouldn't see a psychiatrist. I don't know about today, but in my day it was all right because there was a better type of people who went to a psychiatrist then. They were more sensitive and intelligent. Today, too many common people are going to psychiatrists. Anybody with money or insurance. And I found out a lot of things. I found out things, I don't know how the hell I ever would have found them out. I found out that I had been scarred by the depression. I didn't even know there'd been a depression. And when I'd been scarred by it, I found out that I'd been deprived as a youth. I didn't know that. Didn't seem that way to me. I remember one day the doctor was saying to me, "You mean to say, Mr. Imislund, in 1935 you didn't even have a bicycle?" I said, "No." But I got thinking about it on the way home. I began to remember I never had anything. Plunged me into depression. I'd watch my kids ride their bikes and think, "You ungrateful little snots." I never had anything. I had a mental image for about 2 months, it seemed like, of just a little brown-haired, blue-eyed, rosy-cheeked little boy standing on the streets of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, watching his little friends ride their bicycles back and forth. Don't worry about me. I'll go into psychoanalysis later. Took me almost too much to remember that in 1935, I never knew anybody who had a bicycle. Maybe nobody in Eau Claire had a bicycle. One kid did. We thought he was a puke, and we beat him up and broke his bicycle. But I don't know what psychoanalysis or psychiatry does for other people, but for me, it seemed to have the tendency to fertilize my paranoia. The more I learned, the more I realized I'd been screwed all along. One of the golden memories of when I was a little boy is when my parents were teachers and I had to go to opposite ends of the state to teach during the Depression, so I could live with my grandmother and grandfather. And they just idolized me, and I just had the run of the house. I was a little boy. I hate to see them come back. And when I got into psychoanalysis, I discovered that I had incurred a deep sense of rejection because my parents had rejected me and left me at my grandparents. And I thought, son of a bitch. Another golden memory down the door. By the time I got out of that psychiatric evaluation, I'm several $1,000s cheap. I'm not putting it down at all. But one thing psychiatry does for people like me, I'm not saying I'm not supposed to do this, but it does it for me. It gets you so you know so much about what's caused you to feel this way that it completely blinds you to the fact you're not getting any better. When somebody says, "What the hell's wrong with you?" you can tell them by the hour. "I'll tell you what's wrong with me." They don't want to hear. I still see a psychiatrist once a week today. And a lot of people question me. They say, "If AA works as well as you do, as you say it does, why do you see a psychiatrist once a week?" And for a very simple reason. I've told him if he doesn't get to that Wednesday night meeting, I won't be a sponsor. Don't tell your dad I said that. I got into metaphysics. I got into a lot of things. I read books. I did a lot of things. But what I was primarily trying to do was to find some way to relieve pressures I subliminally felt. To relieve emotions, to relieve stress, to relieve anxiety, to relieve intense emotions. It always seemed to me as I got older that my emotions were like other people's, only they were more intense somehow. More intense. They caused more frustrations and collisions with other personalities and hurt feelings. It seemed my feelings could be hurt by a look. And I can spot rejection 2 blocks away just by I'll get you, son of a bitch, put me down, and on. And one of the things I helped to get through these emotions sometimes was a few drinks. That's why I drink. I'm not a drinker. I'm not some crazed old fool in a name. I drank 3 drinks and criminally assaulted 9 nurses and a nun. Yeah. That's not me. I'm a guy that's been much hurt by bad breaks and misunderstandings. I have been granted some gifts that have worked against me. One gift is the gift of being intelligent and sitting most of my life surrounded by others wishing, why couldn't I be dumb like them? Well, they sat there thinking the same thing about me, unfortunately. Another gift that I was given, I always felt, I have been given the gift by some celestial being to almost instantly spot and identify crapheads. When I was young, it took me 2 sentences and a handshake. The trouble is, as you get older, they multiply. They just, everywhere you go, they're just more and more crapheads. In fact, I don't know if you, but if you are like me, you may wind up with your drinking days. If you have a telephone and you get a telephone bill, you find a lot of long-distance calls on it. Because everybody around here is a craphead. You got to go a long way to talk to anybody, you know. I'll call that kid I was in 3rd grade with. I guess he's in New York now, you know. It's craziness. But I often felt if I could just find some way to redress the imbalance of these damn emotions. Because from time to time I'd put on a burst of speed and I'd fit and everything would be fine and then go to hell. Remember last year, about a year and a half ago, I was up in Vancouver, Washington at an AA thing. And these people up here were I was in Portland, Oregon is where I was. I never went north of San Francisco. There's no rest around here. There are some pukes over there that were at the meeting in Vancouver. I just spotted them there. I've been assigned by God to follow them wherever they move till I get the message. But I was up in Vancouver, and one of the topics of conversation when I was there among some of the people I'd met was they were talking about their experiences with the Mount St. Helens upset. You know, there's nothing in the world drearier than hearing people talk about things that you have nothing to contribute to. You know, well, that's Mount St. Helens. Yeah, sure. Let me tell you some of the things that happened to me. No, we don't want to hear this. We don't hear. But kind of an interesting thing they say, that little by little in their towns, a long way from Mount St. Helens, it'd get grayer. The ash would come down and things would get gray, and their cars would get gray, and the lawns would get gray, and the house would get gray, and it was some kind of a ishy kind of ash you couldn't brush off. You had to scrape it or some hideous. It was enough to make you sick to even hear about it. But they're talking about the graying out of their communities by this Mount St. Helens. And on the plane on the way back, I was thinking about that. That really is the great story of my life. It seems to me that all of my life I have needed intense colors. Not intense colors like in a paint store, but living. I want excitement and fun and colors and bright things and sharp and on and on. And I looked for them again and again, and I found them. And after you find them, one day some invisible Mount St. Helens starts to spew it, and they begin to turn gray. and the colorful job begins to turn gray, and the lover begins to turn gray, and the car begins to turn gray, and the house begins to turn gray, and it just gets grayer and grayer. I have never even yet, I've thought about this before, I don't even understand why Dorothy would ever want to leave Oz to go back to Kansas. Why would you want to leave Colors to get back to some sepia-toned farm somewhere, you know? There may be poison poppies over there and a bad witch or two, but you can work it out. Just nothing to work out over there when it's Grayville. And most of the things in therapeutics I have done in my life are to relieve the desperations I guess I felt as things become gray. And that's why AA was always such an unentrancing place to me. Because it just seemed to be, you come in the end of an endless gray tunnel. Just a gray tunnel where you walk day after day. Say, well, another day without drinking. And you make a year. Is there some kind of sunshine? No. A scrawny arm puts down a 69-cent cake with a candle. And that's all there is. It don't take long of that to say, this is not the answer to my problem. I don't want any more grayness. I can be good for a while. I was trained and conditioned to be good as anybody I know. But I just didn't have any natural flair for it. I never had any training in evil, but I have a natural flair for it. So I can stay good for a while, but eventually I got to get evil again, and then I got to get good again, because my training, I always felt, never made me quite good enough to stay good, but it made you just good enough so you couldn't enjoy evil very long. Even evil turns gray after a while. Everything turns gray. And you got to have some fun, some color, some vividness, some vivacity in life. And I discovered a long time ago that a few drinks has a tendency to enhance the coloration of my surroundings. That's why I drink. I never thought of it that way. I didn't go to a bar and say, I believe I'll have some alcohol to enhance the colors of my surroundings. My thoughts were more like, screw them. But that's what it boiled down to be. And I would start over and over again, and I'd fail again and again, and could not find a way to do it. I came to AA and got sober, like they said, but other people would get up and say, I've been sober now for 41 days. And it just gets gooder and gooder. I just, There's only one thing worse than that, and that's the long-term success story. You know, friends, I drank around the clock for 41 years. One day I walked through that door. The desire to drink left me instantly. I now have $4 million. Several different families have returned to me. And I owe it all to one thing. I put the plug in the jug. I thought, I wish I were dumb like you old son of a bitch. But I've been cursed with the ability to think and feel. And I very nearly died. I came to AA as a relatively high-bottom drunk. I spent a couple of years as a relatively high bottom drunk, and I became a relatively medium bottom drunk for a few years, and I wound up as a low bottom drunk, being 86th from Skid Row, Michigan. And there's a certain personal rejection when that happens. I was telling this guy, I said, you know, I'm not some run-of-the-mill bum you're throwing out of here. I've been on the faculty of the University of Texas. I've directed grand operas. I'm a great sports writer. I have ads appearing in Life magazine. And you're throwing me out? Except I couldn't say it as clearly as I'd meant to because I just had my front teeth kicked out in the Phoenix drunk tank. There is a credibility gap when you can't pronounce consonants. But I knew one thing. I knew that my case was truly different. And I had to find the place where there'd be some color. There is no color in AA. And I've searched for that color, and I found it again and again, and it grays out, and everything grays out, and it all gets gray. And the anxiety comes back, and the despair, and the desperation, and the frustration, and the loneliness. Not even the loneliness of being alone in a room. I can always handle that. It's the loneliness that overcomes you in the middle of big crowds of people, where you're supposed to be fitting in, and just you look around, they all seem to be having fun. I always felt, why have I, with all of my gifts of being able to spot crapheads, I would trade it all for the ability to make small talk. I always felt I'm the only one in the world who cannot make small talk. How are you? Oh, I'm fine. Well, I gotta go now. Or if you do say something, it's the wrong thing. Did you ask her about her mother? Her mother was just executed last week. If there's a sensitive spot, you'll nail it, you know. Let me tell you something funny. This is not very funny, but it'll kill a few minutes till the drawing. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was talking at a noon meeting, a question and answer meeting, where you talk for 30 minutes, and then they have questions for 30 minutes. Yeah, you know what kind of meeting people go to noon meetings. People out of work. Philosophers. Now, what is the true meaning behind the first half of the fourth step? You know, that sort of crap. And we were near the end of this. One guy called him and said, guy nice, it was kind of a full room, but this guy in the back, nice looking guy, as far as I could see, he said, I'd like to ask you, what do you do about anger and rage? I began to tell him, that's a very understandable emotion all of us are familiar with. And I noticed the leader, the secretary sent over a little note to me saying, you better cut it short. The meeting's supposed to end in 3 minutes. And so in my usual gracious way, I said, I've gotten a note from the secretary, I said, asking me to cut short my answer. And I know that many of you have probably got to get home to your apartments and rest this afternoon while I go back to work, and I don't want to keep you from it. And I said, you probably want to hurry right home and watch General Hospital, and there was a titter ran through the crowd. Not Tom in this case, but a kind of a little laugh ran through the crowd. I couldn't understand that. I said, what's the trouble with the secretary? He said, the man that asked that question is the star of General Hospital. The whole goddamn panoply of television, I had to say the wrong thing. So I went up and snubbed him afterwards just to punish him. But that's the story of my life with small talk, it seemed like. And I went through life trying to use alcohol to help tide me through things. I never thought much about it. Because A few years ago, I was listening to a guy's fifth step, and he stumbled onto something in his fifth step, and I almost resented him because I had never thought of it. But he had somehow identified something that I never identified. All my life, I've been dealing with big emotions and fighting them and finding answers and frustrations and rage and anger. But the number one emotion of my life, I never identified till I was sober a few years. And then I had to hear somebody else's emotion to describe it. It isn't a big thing. I've had a lot of big things, but the number one emotion in my life has always been, for most years, just a low level of unease. Just an almost imperceptible level of unease. Just always, this isn't quite it. That is not quite her. That is not quite them. This is not it. Always kind of an unease. And alcohol rids me of that feeling of unease. And alcohol makes my life colorful. And alcohol gives me a little posture. Alcohol gives me some kind of a something. And sometimes I get in trouble when I drink because I have a tendency, I always thought, to burst loose because of the repressions of my goodness. I'm so good when I'm good that when I'm bad, I just... And I had no idea that there was something that described the nature of my illness. I suppose coming to understand the nature of the illness here is the biggest single stumbling block of anyone's sobriety. I've been watching this for years and years. We get tangled up with all of the discussions of what things really mean and what the steps and so on, and very little attention sometimes is paid to what is the nature of the illness. I've read this book several times, and I was sober for a number of years before I noticed in that book there's an absolute word for paragraphs description of my story, and I never identified it all the times I read it. And it's the story of most of us, I believe. But you have to somehow be around a while before you identify it. At least I do. And it was read today. It's the first page or two of chapter 3. It talks about the nature, the symptomatic nature of the illness. It says the great obsession of people like us is that somehow, someday, we will control and enjoy our drinking. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many of us pursue it into the gates of insanity and death. Not up to the gates of insanity and death, but into. That's why maybe over 95% of people like you and me will literally wind up pursuing it into the gates of insanity and death. That's why a number of people in this room today who are apparently feeling good will wind up pursuing it into the gates of insanity and death. Maybe me, maybe you, we don't know. It depends on how you're doing when the crunch comes. Nobody knows when the crunch is going to come. And the one thing we have in common, that somehow, some way I will control and enjoy my drinking. And then it goes on to say that we have apparent relapses or apparent recoveries. And we all are familiar with that. Followed always by still worse relapse. Until you get to a condition, that's such a delicious choice of words. I've been a writer all my life, and I just love that phrase. It's such an exquisite choice of words. You get to a stage of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. Years ago, I used to think that's how you got when you were drunk. You get so drunk, you just get to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. I've come to believe in the last number of years that that isn't how it is at all. That is the feeling that comes right after you're sober again this time. Pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. You can't even think of a rationale to sell yourself, to say nothing to lay on the people around you. In fact, there's a lot of talk among we talk a lot around here about suicides and feelings of suicide and going to commit suicide and attempted suicide and on and on. A few years ago, I was on a radio program for the AA Public Service Office in L.A. at something called KFAC. And this guy had me on a talk show for about an hour and a half talking about my story, then answering phone calls. And they listed me, they carried me as Alcoholic Al to protect my good name, I'm sure. And, but this guy was leading me through my story, and he said, he stopped me in the middle of it. He said, Al, do you mean that you sent your wife and your little children to church, and then you parked your car in your garage and turned on the motor and committed suicide? And that unless a neighbor going by hadn't heard the motor running, pulled you out already dead and beat on your chest and gave you mouth resuscitation? You mean that happened? You know, I couldn't believe this idiot. Of course I just said it. You know, where the hell do you think I got it? You tell your story so often, it doesn't mean anything to him. And he had big tears in his eyes. He said, Al, I've never talked to anybody who's actually tried to commit suicide before. And I guess I'd been in AA too long. I said, my God, I never talked to anybody who didn't. You know, I never heard of anybody who didn't try to commit suicide. If you haven't tried to commit suicide, you haven't lived. Yeah. But so there's a lot of talk about drunks. Drunks all the time are going to commit suicide whenever they get thwarted. But very few drunken suicides are successful, comparatively speaking. Some are, but very few are. I've often pondered that. I've talked to authorities in the field of suicide. I don't think they have any idea. Any one of us know better. But I think it boils down to this. Drunks commit suicide to make somebody sorry that they've hurt them or rejected them or treated them badly. And when you're in the midst of your suicide, you suddenly realize, I won't be here to see them be sorry. Yeah. And then you have, oh no. That's why you sometimes get calls, as I have, and maybe you have too, you know. Hello? I just called up to tell you that I'm checking out. I've taken an overdose of pills. She's hurt me once too often. I wanted to thank you for your efforts to help me. I don't want anyone to disturb me at 410 East 14th Street. Yeah. I wasn't against God, but I felt if he ever found out where I was screwed, I'll tell you. So we worked out a deal where we were going to, just for cuteness, we almost did it, and we got caught at the last minute. We got nailed. We were going to put in a dial-a prayer for atheists. Just equal time, where you dial this number, and nobody ever answers. You just... But very few drunks actually commit suicide. Most of them are considered to be accidental. Do you know when most alcoholic suicides take place? Shortly after sobriety. Shortly after being sober again, when you're immersed in a stage of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization that is so strong that it temporarily induces a psychosis that submerges the basic survival instinct, which is the strongest instinct anybody has. And they don't make calls because they can't even think of any reason to rationalize or justify their conduct. I'd rather die than try to explain it again. Now, certainly that's an aberration, and certainly that's not very often. But that's when alcoholic suicides take place. It's a funny thing. A few years ago, as most of you know, when I had become somewhat successful again after sobriety and working in marketing and advertising, I gave up that career, and for the last few years I'm the director of the mission that 86'd me. getting revenge on a long-term basis on those people. I'll tell you something funny about Skid Row. I can't remember the last suicide on Skid Row. There's hardly ever suicide on Skid Row. People die badly. They die almost every day on my desk. There's somebody who's been found dead in the doorway, stabbed to death in the alley, fallen in front of a bus or a truck, knifed. Just dreadful. But hardly ever any suicides. For one simple reason, I think, that they no longer have a great deal of emotional conflict. They have surrendered to what they are. Nothing. They have surrendered not to what they are, but to what they think they are, what their mind tells them they are. Do you know where suicides take place? It's where people have to get up every morning and pretend everything is all right and get it together and go out and face them and live up to standards they can't live with, and one day it gets so goddamn much you can't take anymore. When you give up, you hardly ever commit suicide. Odd thing. I'm sure that there are new people here today who are wondering how you're going to get around this. Just, I don't know. I got mine. Probably the biggest thing I could tell anybody new or old today is for just a couple of minutes. I want to talk just a few minutes and get out of here. The greatest things you got to be careful for are coming to understand the nature of your illness. Now, if you are like me, you might have had misconceptions for years about AA. What is an alcoholic? That's the nature of the illness. What is an alcoholic? Well, sometimes it seems like an alcoholic is a person who's been in a lot of prisons and jails and hospitals. And I'm going to tell you something funny. Sometimes the very nature of our meetings drive people away that need to be here. And I'm not blaming anybody at all. It's nobody's fault. But it's this. AA is made up of human beings. And human beings are more fascinated by bizarre things than everyday things. And, you know, when you have a speaker, it's kind of fun to have a speaker who's, and exciting times. And you go to hear a speaker and say, I'm just a housewife, and I drank behind closed shades for 10 years, and I raised 4 children. It was just hideous. You know, oh, come on, let's have some prisoners. Let's have some excitement. In fact, you get into kind of a podium thing here. This must be the only spiritual program in the world in which speakers sometimes apologize for not having been in jail. You know, now, I've never been in jail, but I should have been. Oh, swear to God, a lot of times. Yeah. What the hell is that about? We got an also almost upside-down social structure. 5 times in jail equals 1 penitentiary as far as spiritual credibility. 2 state penitentiaries equal 1 federal penitentiary. The worse you've been, the better you are. I don't understand that. 2 federal penitentiaries, 1 state penitentiary, and 4 nut houses, and you can build hotels on Boardwalk and Park Place. Yes, get into it. It has been estimated by authorities, and I'll tell you that every and all figures in the study of alcoholism are incomplete or wrong. No one has percentile figures. The only one who has percentile figures are places who seem to make their living by treating alcoholics. They have ironclad percentile figures, and you can't deny them because they're not correct. We don't judge, we just report. But it has been estimated by some knowledgeable people that over 50% of alcoholics have never been in a jail or in a hospital. Not in a hospital until they get to the end of the line. That isn't how you measure alcoholics, by being in jails or hospitals. In fact, when you stay around a while and your perceptions get a little keener, I have come to believe that the most horrible stories I hear today, because I empathize now, is not the runners and the bizarre people. It's those kind of people like the housewife, trapped in that house having to look good every day, having to take care of those children, having to, no matter what happens, you can't run. You're stuck, and it's just on and on. In my life, I run. I've run a lot of times. But when you can't run, you really are dead. I sometimes listen to those housewives now, and newcomers are yawning, and I sit there thinking, I don't know how you did it. I couldn't have done that in 1,000 years. It's just too much. But that isn't how it's measured by jails or nut houses. You sometimes get the impression real alcoholics stay drunk all the time. I stayed drunk round the clock for 20 years. You think, oh, you're an alcoholic, you old son of a bitch. I'll tell you that. I'm going to tell you a little something I discovered when I was about 5 years sober, working in the field of medicine. I'm not a doctor, but studying the field of medicine. It is physically impossible for a human body to stay intoxicated 14 straight days and nights in a laboratory, to say nothing of the street. That's one of the great problems of being a drinker, is that you keep sobering up all the time. Again and again. And you sometimes get the impression these days that you should have to go to a detox center, to a hospital to get off it. If you can't afford a detox center or a hospital, you will go through the classic American detox. That is known as your toilet. I'm sure there isn't a person in this room who hasn't knelt in front of the old porcelain altar early in the morning and gazed into those shimmering waters, waiting for an answer to surface. And saying your morning prayer, oh God. And if you have any loved ones left at all, they stand outside of the bathroom door and give you moral support. Good enough for you, you son of a bitch! Why don't you go over and puke at her house? Oh, it's just... That is not fun. Well, maybe the alcoholics are people who when they take a drink, they go crazy all the time. And maybe you've had several nights of drinking, or it hasn't been. You haven't gone crazy. You know, I remember years ago, with a guy in Chicago, 30 years ago at an AA meeting when I was slipping around, I said, what is this physical effect they talk about? He says, it sets up for you to drink is to set up a terrible craving. So I went to a bar right after that meeting to run that test. I just thought, I better find out once and for all. No craving. Thank Christ. Do you know what really makes drinking so bad? It isn't that you go crazy. It's that you don't know when you're going to go crazy. Drinking, for me and you apparently, the curse of alcohol is that it's like playing Russian roulette every time out. You don't know when you're going to win and when you're going to lose. You win a few and you lose one. It's as though you never won any. And when you start out and you're young and strong, some of us are click, click, I'm getting by with it. Boom. Let's not go to Rocky's Rockaway anymore. Click. But as the years go by, it's just boom, boom. I tell you, there's a click in there somewhere. Sometimes you get by. That's what they mean when they say you cannot guarantee your behavior after 2 drinks. It doesn't mean that you're going to suddenly start crazy. It means that nobody in this room, after a couple drinks, can tell us now whether they will continue or stop, because it is going to look different. That's what they mean when they say you can't guarantee your behavior. So you say, what the hell is it then? Why would anybody keep drinking when you're starting to eat you up? Why don't you just say, hey man, that stuff has eaten me up, I'm not going to drink it anymore, to hell with it. Anything that did that to you, you'd stop. But people like us continue again. because we almost never seem to find out that the true effect of alcohol on 7% of the bodies who drink alcohol, different to the 93% of the bodies who drink alcohol, it isn't what it does to us that makes you an alcoholic at all. It seems to be what it does for us. Alcohol apparently does something for me that it doesn't do for most people. It almost instantly alters the way things look. It almost instantly alters my relationship to my environment. It almost instantly makes me larger and more self-contained and them smaller and less frightening. It seems to do something to fill in holes I didn't know I have even. But I don't even know it does that for me. I don't even know it, because you don't know what it's doing for other people. But that's why you don't spend much time with new friends who, when you buy them another drink, they say, "Oh, no thanks, I'm starting to feel it." That's why you're drinking it, goof. When I'm in a bar at 11 o'clock at night with the people who know color, and I hear a voice say, "Hey, let's go to Reno!" I want to hear a lot of people say, "You bet your ass." I don't want to be around a bunch of people saying, "Why? It's so late. I have to be to work at 9. What'll I tell Blanche?" Tell her to go get screwed. Alcohol does something special for me. It literally alters my perception of reality. There's nothing wrong with that. Except if it does that for me, it little by little erodes my ability to deal with reality. As I can make drinking more colorful, reality must become more gray. And the curse of alcoholism, it isn't an alcohol problem, it's an alcohol answer. The disease is known as alcoholism, and it's combined with this. Alcohol does something special for you that erodes your ability to deal with naked conflict. And the curse is that by the time you're starting to, alcohol is doing something to you, and you got to live in reality, you are now no longer able to live in there on a sustained basis. Being sober for an alcoholic, sometimes people around AA say, "Why do I feel bad?" I'm going to tell you something that we forget all the time. The natural state of a sober alcoholic is depressed anxiety. That is the natural state of a sober alcoholic. Anything other than that must be acquired. It must be acquired. So you begin to understand that maybe the function of Alcoholics Anonymous is not that I thought it was, someplace to get sober and feel better. Getting sober won't make you feel better. There's a certain novelty of being sober for a while, but eventually the gray comes in again, and it comes bad. So maybe you can help remember, I hope I can remember, that the purpose of the actions of Alcoholics Anonymous, of a sponsor, as we heard talked about today, of the steps that we heard talked about today, of doing these things over a period of time, is not to make you wonderful or grand. It's something infinitely more powerful. It is to little by little change the way things look to you, to gradually upgrade your perception of reality, to little by little degray sobriety, to eventually begin to add color to your life, to little by little find that mixing spot of color called hope, and of tenuous belief, well, for God's sakes, maybe it will work. The feeling may go away tomorrow, but I had it for a while, and I'll try it again. That's why sponsors, as we're talked about today, are so good. To get a sponsor you cannot manipulate. I was interested in one of the questions, should you have more than one sponsor? Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but the answer given was so grand. When I have two sponsors, I'll play them against each other like a zither. till I get no. When you have more than one sponsor, you don't have any sponsor, in my opinion. You got to have somebody who knows you for warts and all, and when you're doing bad, try to stay out of sight. That's Tom's theory. Not mine, of course. But I'll tell you, some of the strangest things happen as you upgrade your perception. I am close to the children I didn't see for years. I am close to my parents who I didn't see for years. The university, we were talking about that at the break, the university I was expelled from 1 month before graduation for my moral depravity. Today it would make me chaplain of the university for that, but then there was little different rules. A couple of years ago they had me come back, and because of my work in AA, they named me their Distinguished Alumnus of the Year, and I spoke at their commencement. It was all I could do to keep from saying, "Why didn't you give me my degree, you cheap bastard?" If the best alumnus you got, you've screwed, that tells you something about the rest of them, I'll tell you that. All this is very nice. I've come to believe in a God that is not colored by childish guilt and misperception, a God I've spoken to earnestly every day for years. It's incredible. I stop thinking about it. The best psychiatrists and doctors I ever knew said I would have to take some form of medication as long as I lived for my emotions. And next year, if I survive, knock on wood, and don't get drunk, it'll be a quarter of a century since I've had a drink or a medication or anything for my emotions. And next year it'll be 25 years for Tom. Tom, your previous speaker, got sober 6 weeks after I did in the same place. Just think, if our roles would have been reversed, I'd have been the first speaker and he'd have been the second speaker. Well, guess God knows what he's doing. But the number one celebration of sobriety is to be involved, because when you're not involved, things don't change that much. Your intellect rarely will be satisfied if that's what you're trying to go on. AA is not designed to help your intellect. AA is designed to straighten out the emotions that warp your intellect and to keep the emotions flowing, to live in the world. I'm very happy to be here today in a room full of people like this. There's no place else I'd rather be. And I know that when I go out of the door tonight, don't even have to look at the streets. I don't care if it's San Jose or what the hell it is. I have the tools to make that town look good if I use them. And to live at peace with the world. It can be Eau Claire, Wisconsin, or Chicago, or Miami. You don't have to be concerned where you are. As long as they're looking all right, you know AA works. And that's what it's about. I am most pleased that Bruce and the committee invited me up here. I am most happy to take part in this celebration. But the number one goal of all, I'm glad that I am involved with you. Not because I need it, but they all need it. And when I don't do it, they know it and act funny. So all we ask of you, newcomer, is dedicate your life to doing these things, not because you need it, as a sacrifice to those jerks out there. When you do these things, they'll act nice. And when you don't, they'll act funny. So let's do the best we can to keep those fools straightened out. Thank you.
God, that was great.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. The to install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.